But there's one story that keeps me awake at night, and it's about Doa, a Syrian refugee, 19 years old. She was living a grinding existence in Egypt, working day wages. Her dad was constantly thinking of his thriving business back in Syria that had been blown to pieces by a bomb. And the war that drove them there was still raging in its fourth year. And the community that once welcomed them there had become weary of them. And one day, men on motorcycles tried to kidnap her. Once an aspiring student thinking only of her future, now she was scared all the time. But she was also full of hope because she was in love with a fellow Syrian refugee named Bassem. And Bassem was also struggling in Egypt. And he said to Doa, "Let's go to Europe, seek asylum, safety. I will work, you can study, the promise of a new life." And he asked her father for her hand in marriage. But they knew to get to Europe, they had to risk their lives, traveling across the Mediterranean Sea, putting their hands in smugglers notorious for their cruelty. And Doa was terrified of the water. She always had been. She never learned to swim. It was August that year, and already 2,000 people had died trying to cross the Mediterranean. But Doa knew of a friend who had made it all the way to Northern Europe, and she thought maybe we can too. So she asked her parents if they could go. And after a painful discussion, they consented, and Bassem paid his entire life savings, $2,500 each, to the smugglers. It was a Saturday morning when the call came, and they were taken by bus to a beach, hundreds of people on the beach. They were taken then by small boats onto an old fishing boat, 500 of them crammed onto that boat, 300 below, 500 above. There were Syrians, Palestinians, Africans, Muslims, and Christians, 100 children, including Sandra, little Sandra, 6 years old, and Masa, 18 months. There were families on that boat, crammed together, shoulder to shoulder, feet to feet. Doa was sitting with her legs crammed up to her chest, Bassem holding her hand. And soon they saw a boat approach, a smaller boat, 10 men on board, started shouting at them, hurling insults, throwing sticks, asking them to all disembark and get on this smaller, more unseaworthy boat. The parents were terrified for their children, and they collectively refused to disembark. So the boat sped away in anger, and a half an hour later, came back and started deliberately ramming a hole in the side of Doa's boat, just below where she and Bassem were sitting. And she heard how they yelled, "Let the fish eat your flesh." And they started laughing as the boat capsized and sank. The 300 people below deck were doomed. Doa was holding onto the side. One man approached them with a small baby perched on his shoulder, 9 months old, Malik. He was holding onto a gas canister to stay afloat. And he said to them, "I fear I am not going to survive. I'm too weak. I don't have the courage anymore." And he handed little Malik over to Bassem and to Doa, and they perched her onto the life ring. So now they were three, Doa, Bassem, and little Malik. And let me take a pause in this story right here. Temporary. Back to Doa and Bassem in the water. It was their second day, and Bassem was getting very weak. And now it was Doa's turn to say to Bassem, "My love, please hold on to hope, to our future. We will make it." And he said to her, "I'm sorry, my love, that I put you in this situation. I have never loved anyone as much as I love you." And he released himself into the water. And Doa watched as the love of her life drowned before her eyes. Later that day, a mother came up to Doa with her small 18-month-old daughter, Masa. This was the little girl I showed you in the picture earlier with the life vests. Her older sister, Sandra, had just drowned, and her mother knew she had to do everything in her power to save her daughter. And she said to Doa, "Please take this child. Let her be part of you. I will not survive." And then she went away and drowned. So Doa, the 19-year-old refugee who was terrified of the water, who couldn't swim, found herself in charge of two little baby kids. And they were thirsty, and they were hungry, and they were agitated. And she tried her best to amuse them, to sing to them, to say words to them from the Quran. Around them, the bodies were bloating and turning black. The sun was blazing during the day. At night, there was a cold moon and fog. It was very frightening. And the fourth day in the water, this is how Doa probably looked on the ring with her two children. A woman came on the fourth day and approached her and asked her to take another child, a little boy, just 4 years old. When Doa took the little boy and the mother drowned, she said to the sobbing child, "She just went away to find you water and food." But his heart soon stopped, and Doa had to release the little boy into the water. Later that day, she looked up into the sky with hope because she saw two planes crossing in the sky, and she waved her arms, hoping they would see her, but the planes were soon gone. But that afternoon, as the sun was going down, she saw a boat, a merchant vessel, and she said, "Please, God, let them rescue me." She waved her arms, and she felt like she shouted for about 2 hours, and it had become dark. But finally, the searchlights found her, and they extended a rope, astonished to see a woman clutching onto two babies. They pulled them onto the boat, they got oxygen and blankets, and a Greek helicopter came to pick them up and take them to the island of Crete. But Doa looked down and asked, "What of Malik?" And they told her the little baby did not survive. She drew her last breath in the boat's clinic. But Doa was sure that as they had been pulled up onto the rescue boat, that little baby girl had been smiling. Only 11 people survived that wreck of the 500. There was never an international investigation into what happened. There was some media reports about mass murder at sea, a terrible tragedy, but that was only for one day. And then the news cycle moved on. Meanwhile, in a pediatric hospital on Crete, little Masa was on the edge of death. She was really dehydrated. Her kidneys were failing. Her glucose levels were dangerously low. The doctors did everything in their medical power to save them, and the Greek nurses never left her side, holding her, hugging her, singing her words. My colleagues also visited and said pretty words to her in Arabic. And amazingly, little Masa survived. And soon, the Greek press started reporting about the miracle baby who had survived 4 days in the water without food or anything to drink. And offers to adopt her came from all over the country.